Good morning, and welcome to Talk About It with Trey. On this program, I have the privilege to sit down with critical thinkers and community leaders to discuss ideas worth talking about. Our program today is generously supported by our fabulous ComArts UIWtv production team and the San Antonio Fulbright Association. I happen to be highly involved with both of these groups. First, as a representative of the UIW community, I am reminded part of our very own mission states that we are to educate men and women who will become concerned and enlightened citizens within the global community. UIW welcomes to our community persons of diverse backgrounds in the belief that their respectful interaction advances the discovery of truth, mutual understanding, self-realization, and the common good. Part of that diversity is diversity of thought. And so on this show, we welcome conversations that are diverse in thought. Second, as a representative of our local Fulbright Association chapter, I have the awesome responsibility and opportunity to promote educational events that enable deeper cultural understanding around the world. In the year 2021, we were reminded that our global community is actually quite local. Everyone in studio today arrived wearing masks to hold a discussion about mental health and well-being, but we aren't unique. I'm reminded that our neighbors down the street, just like those across the globe, are wearing masks too. From San Antonio to California to Calcutta, the world is wrestling with the pandemic just as they are issues of mental health and well-being. Our brothers and sisters across the globe, just like across our campus, are concerned about some of the very issues we will address here today. It's a reminder, local is global. With that, let's get started. Today, I'm here with Dr. Kevin Milligan, Director of Counseling Services at UIW, and we are joined by Pilar Gonzaba, an accomplished student athlete and dedicated mental health advocate. Pilar, Dr. Milligan, welcome to the program. Glad you're here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Let's talk mental health.
Yes, sir.
And before we get started, I want to get the language right.
Okay.
I think people hear a lot of different words about mental health and well-being, but sometimes they may be using words that I don't know where we're getting these definitions, where we're getting some of the actual understanding of them.
Right.
So Dr. Milligan, I'm wondering if you can level set for us a little bit.
Okay.
What do we mean when we say mental health?
All right. So that is a very loaded question, I think, and loaded definition, and all-encompassing in and of itself. So I think, to start, let's look at the definition of physical health, right? When we think of our physical health, we're looking at ourselves being either physically fit, healthy, not sick, not having diseases. And it's very similar to the mental health aspect of when we're looking at mental health, we're looking at someone's ability to process emotions, to understand, their role and the things that they need, their ability to work through difficult situations when they come up and they arise. We're looking at that aspect of resiliency and, how does someone cope and navigate the trials in life that we feel every day. So that's kind of mental health in and of itself. I think when we kind of look at maybe a different word, maybe we're looking at like mental illness, I think it's one that we look at. And when we look at mental illness, that's when we're starting to look at the symptoms that we're noticing when people need to reach out for counseling or psychiatry services or those type of things, because the symptoms that they're experiencing are related to their mental well-being. They're feeling anxious or depressed or struggling with thoughts that are disturbing or behaviors that are not appropriate or that are causing an issue. So I think, when we're looking at that definition of mental health, there's different aspects of it that we're looking at, but overall it's just how well are you doing being able to cope and manage life, I think is how we want to look at it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I'll often hear a student say they're feeling sad, or they'll say something like, I'm just a little depressed.
Right.
Those words, I think sometimes they get used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing.
Correct.
And it's similar when I hear a student say, like, I'm stressed about an exam. That's not the same as this, I'm experiencing anxiety or I'm having anxious thoughts.
Correct.
But they get used interchangeably. So it's kind of a tricky situation. Do we operate under the colloquialisms of how people talk about a word, or when do we know to actually apply some type of definition? Can you help us unpack just a little bit more, maybe where those lines are between sadness, depression, stress, anxiety?
Yeah, so I think, they are used interchangeably quite a bit. And I think sometimes it is a little accurate because sadness is part of what we feel when we're feeling depressed or we're experiencing depression. So sadness is usually associated with an event. Something happened, you failed a test, or you lost someone, or something didn't go the way you wanted it to, and now you're feeling sad about it. You're feeling a little down. Sadness is usually temporary. We can usually overcome it. We don't have this sense of worthlessness associated with sadness. A lot of times, once we finish taking that test or we get our grade back or whatever it may be, the sadness is gone. Whereas with depression, it's a lot more severe in the symptoms. It's a lot more all-encompassing. People with depression don't necessarily have to have a trigger for it. They have this overwhelming sense of guilt, which there may be no reason for that guilt. They feel a sense of worthlessness and hopelessness. A lot of times with depression, you can't just overcome it in a short amount of time. It takes some additional treatment and getting that care. With depression, we tend to have some suicidal thoughts that come associated with it because of that sense of guilt and worthlessness and hopelessness that they're experiencing. So, and depression is identified as a mental health diagnosis, a mental health illness. Sometimes we look at it as just a depressive disorder or major depressive disorder, which I'm sure most people have heard of, and treatment is needed. Whereas with sadness, maybe a little pep talk or, some support, or maybe getting that grade back where you thought you were going to do bad and you did well can definitely help with it. So those are some of the biggest differences in looking at the difference between sadness and depression.
Okay, last one on the definitions.
Yes.
I remember at the start of the pandemic, I remember reading, I believe it was in the New York Times, an article that said that feeling you have, that's grief. I think that was the headline.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting. They're applying this term to this feeling that many people may be feeling during the pandemic. And then I recently read a headline that said, we are in languishing. And I'm just wondering, maybe, I know sometimes people like to use buzzy headlines, I get that.
Yeah, big words, right?
But for the everyday reader like me, I'm trying to make sense of this. Is what people are feeling is grief? Is it languishing? Can you help us unpack that a bit?
Yeah, so I think with grief is our reaction to loss. So I think a lot of times we associate grief with, the death of someone close to us, which obviously it is. But grief can be so much more all-encompassing in the sense of, when the pandemic started, we lost our sense of normalcy. A lot of us may be very social people. We interact with family, friends, our colleagues. When the pandemic started, all that stopped. We got put in quarantine, the world shut down. And so we lost that sense of connection. We lost that sense of what we consider normal. We lost that sense of our identity, a lot of us. So we were grieving in that sense. We were grieving this loss of what we had and what we were comfortable with and what we valued. And with languish is kind of like we're having a hard time being able to move forward. Like we're really just sitting on it. Whereas grief and loss is the process of dealing with loss and understanding it and moving forward from it. Languish is more like we're feeling stuck. Like we're having a hard time moving forward. We're having a hard time kind of accepting the situation. And what do we do to get through this? And so I think when we're looking at what those mean, I think that's probably the easiest way to kind of understand what we're going through during this time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Pilar, I know you are a student athlete. And I always put a pause on that because my hunch is that a student athlete is both 100% student and also 100% athlete. So I don't want to ever shortchange that term, student athlete. And then on top of that, I know that you're also an advocate for mental health and well-being and a vocal advocate for your peers. I'm wondering, here you are, student athlete, advocate for mental health and well-being, but yet you are fully immersed as a college student. You probably have residence hall experience, you have dining hall experiences, you have up and down the quad experiences. How do college students that you interact with talk about mental health?
I think we embrace, and so it's hard for us to sit down one-on-one having problems, don't know what. So what I'm doing on campus right now, I'm president of a mental health club on campus. And what we do is we're fighting that stigma to say, like, it's okay to talk to someone about this. Like, we're going to give you the resources so that you are able to talk to someone about this and able to feel comfortable when you need to go to your friend and say, hey, like, I don't know what I'm feeling right now. Like, is it sadness or is it depression? And so I think a lot of times people, like Dr. Milligan said, like we kind of just use them, interchangeably. One, because we like, you know, as my society right now, like my generation, we like to joke about a lot of things, which, you know, I think is okay to a certain extent. But when it comes to mental health and you're joking like, oh, I'm like super depressed right now, you know, like that's something where instead of being like, oh yeah, like we should be like, oh, like, okay, so then what do you mean by that? Like, what are you feeling? You know, and so as a college student walking through campus every day, like you just see people with, it could be 90 degrees outside with their hoods on, you know, eyes down. And we've come to kind of agreement as on my generation to just leave everyone be, to not, you know, go up to someone and be like, hey, like, what's wrong? Like, are you feeling okay? Or if someone's sitting alone, just be like, you know what, like they probably want to sit alone, things like that. So like what I want to do and what I want our campus to change is like, be okay with going up to someone and be like, hey, like I notice you look a little lonely, or, you know, something like that, and be like, is there anything wrong? Is there anything I can help you with? And, you know, I get people are, you know, to themselves, and that's completely okay. You're going to have people like that. You're going to have people like me who are not afraid to speak out about things. But I think what we need to do is like find a median between that and be like, hey, like, you know, let's sit down, let's normalize this talk about mental illness. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just having it as a conversation that we have every single day. I think that's what a lot of people don't get, is that it doesn't have to just be like, if someone is in a depressive episode, be like, hey, you know what, like, I've noticed you've been laying in bed all day. Like, what's wrong? You know, like, this is something that we should talk about, you know, at the lunch table or while waiting in line for Starbucks on campus. You know, it's something that we do need to normalize here and everywhere on college campuses.
Yeah, thank you, Pilar. That's the hope, even with a conversation like this one, is letting people know that we want to talk about this and we want people to have healthy, productive conversations about it. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I also noticed, Dr. Milligan, when you were talking about, when I asked you about mental health, you said, well, think of it kind of like physical health. And you kind of went to a topic that people are comfortable talking about. Right? It's normal to say something like, hey, do you want to go work out? Or like, hey, would you like to go on a jog? Or like, oh, I don't eat that because it's not really good for me. Talking about physical health and nutrition is something that seems commonplace. And like you're saying right now, wouldn't it be nice if we got to a place where talking about mental health was as normal and normalized as talking about physical health? Question for you, Dr. Milligan.
Yes, sir.
How long have people been studying, talking about mental health? I mean, is this ages old? Is this more recent?
So it would be considered a more recent movement. I mean, I think we could go back all the way, you know, even in the 1800s. You know, there's an activist, Dorothy Dix, in the 1840s. She really pushed. She recognized the treatment of those that would be considered mentally ill, mental health patients, and how inhumane it was. So she pushed for what we would consider now like mental hospitals, psychiatric hospitals. So, you know, it started then, and then in the 1900s, you know, there was a movement pushed forward with, you know, again, looking at the inhumane treatment and how can we better treat these individuals. Then obviously a lot of us know Freud and all those things, you know, but I think the conversation really started to take effect around World War I, because they started to really recognize the impact that it was having on the soldiers. You know, I'm sure we've all heard of like shell shocked. That would be now what we consider post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And they started to realize that these men and women weren't leaving the war there. They were bringing it home with them. And so they started to recognize, like, we need to figure out a way to better treat these individuals. And then obviously, as advocacy as it picked up, we've recognized that it's not just those who've dealt with trauma, but everyone struggles with anxiety, depression, mental health. And so I think the conversation is definitely being advocated for more now, I think due to people recognizing the importance of it. But I mean, even our diagnostic manual was first printed in the 1950s. So I think in the last about 100 years, I'd say we've definitely made a significant push in the direction for mental health. But unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. And so I think right now is a very critical time for us to really make that next step and figure out what can we do, like Pilar said, make this normal, you know, make this part of our normal conversation. Because, you know, as you mentioned with the physical health aspect, if we see someone with a broken leg, we're like, oh, how'd that happen? Are you doing okay? How can I help you? Carry your books, you know. But if we see someone sitting alone or crying, our immediate thought is, I don't want to touch that. I don't know what's going on. I don't want to get involved. But in reality, that's what we need to do. It doesn't mean that we're nosy. It doesn't mean we have to know everything that's going on. But it's just like, hey, how are you doing? What can I do to help? I noticed this, and that. And I think sometimes we're afraid of making the assumption But in reality, if you're focusing on the behaviors that you see, the things that they're saying, there's no assumption there. You're using facts. And so I think that's where we can help really push mental health moving forward, is people being more comfortable having those conversations. And just as we would, if someone got diagnosed with cancer, we're not going to say, oh, just get over it, or oh, it's going to get better. No, we say, go to a doctor, go get chemotherapy, go whatever get the treatment is. But if someone's with depression, we're like, oh, well, it'll pass, or just don't be sad. And it's like I tell people, if someone could choose not to feel this way, they would not choose to feel this way. It's not a choice. It's something that happens, just as someone gets cancer or diabetes. And so I think in our level of advocacy, we're definitely moving in that direction, but we have a lot of room to go.
Yeah.
I think also right now, like moving forward, like social media right now, like a lot of people who are, advocates like me are using that platform to help that, because, my generation, we're all about social media, Snapchat, everything like that. And so I think, we're using those platforms now, Facebook, like even though Facebook is old, like we're using that, and so I think that helps a lot, because there's a lot of people who are on the social media apps, and when they see things and you interact with things, you start getting, it's like what do they call it, an algorithm. You start getting more and more things that you interact with. And so I think, like for me, I interact with like a lot of mental health patients and therapists on Instagram that says like, hey, like let's normalize this, let's normalize this on a platform where everyone can see it, not just, oh, I'm going to write about it in a blog to where only a certain amount of people can see it, So I think social media right now, in my experience, just what I've been looking at, like it has boomed with let's talk about mental illness, let's talk about mental health. It's the same thing, if not more important than physical health, So I think a lot of people are starting to understand that, which helps a lot for college campuses and everything like that. Like I know the athletics program, we just got a sports psychologist to help us, and we've been integrating a lot more mental health things within the different sports on campus. And so that's helps, because a lot of athletes feel like, oh, I have to be strong all the time, and like that's a huge stigma with athletes that I've noticed, because I used to think about it myself too, like, oh, I have to be strong, like I have to, be perfect 100% of the time. And so I think that we're doing good steps on our campus to ensure that people are like, okay, like mental health, like what is it? What do I need to know about it? How can I help somebody,
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think oftentimes people will point to negative or adverse effects of social media on mental health. And what you're pointing to is the duality of perhaps that exists, but also perhaps that in social media are spaces for social support online. And also for information that people can seek, maybe in a non-face threatening way. If I'm feeling low and I want to go be inspired or go find resources, I can find it on social media without having to show my face to someone. And so there is perhaps this other side of social media and its benefits. I also appreciate you bringing that up, because I do feel like social media has spiked the conversation of mental health and well-being. I'm curious to know what y'all think about the past 12 months. In the past 12 months, I mean, I don't have to remind anyone, a pandemic, racial tension, political unrest, a storming of a Capitol. I mean, the list could go on and on of the things that we could point to in the past 12 months. I'm curious to know, what do we believe or think is the relationship between the past 12 months alone and the conversations of mental health and well-being? Is it an amplifying loop? Is one impacting the other? How does this work?
So, it comes back to that old saying, right? What came first, the chicken or the egg, right? I think it'd be really hard for us to say, one caused the other, but I'm pretty comfortable saying that with everything that's going on, mental health has definitely played a significant role in it. And so I think when it comes to the pandemic, as we talked about earlier, with the sense of isolation and loneliness that people experience, I think that's one thing that we've not necessarily ignored, but I guess hasn't been talked about as often as it should. That yes, we've been dealing with a worldwide health pandemic, but within that, we've been dealing with a mental health epidemic as well. Like mental health and the need for it has significantly increased. I think I was reading an article where it said at least a 50% increase in certain areas in mental health need. Whereas the resources that are available haven't. And so I think, there's that relationship there. Due to the pandemic, things we're experiencing, people's anxiety levels are higher. Their depression levels are higher. A lot more anger and frustration have been associated. And a lot of times with what happens with those, we have what are called cognitive distortions. And what that is those are basically inaccurate perceptions of events or assumptions that we create. So for example, if someone's dealing with anxiety, feeling isolated, automatically they think, oh, no one loves me, no one cares for me, no one, wants me around. When in reality, none of that is true. But our mental health and our anxiety has allowed us to think that that's accurate. When it comes to the racial tensions, with the anger and all that's brought up, it really creates these assumptions and perceptions of individuals in a world that there might be some accuracies to it. But if we really took a step back and really listened to people and recognize that even though we're different and we think differently, we don't have to react so emotionally or so irrationally, then, and the role that mental health plays in that, then I think that we could start to see some of that progress there. And I think, when we look at some of the things that have happened with the riots and the shootings and those things, I mean, it's hard for me to say that someone would do those things without having something emotionally just going on, something that they're trying to work through. And so I think when we look at the relationship, I would say that there is definitely a correlation where mental health played a role in a lot of the things that we're experiencing. How much of a role? Again, that's every individual, every situation is different. But I would definitely say that there is a significant correlation between what we're going through and mental health and the experiences people are having.
Yeah, I think with that too, like we're not normalcy right now. And a lot of people, their normal thing was to just put it behind them and act like nothing's wrong. Yeah. So when we're faced with a pandemic and we're faced with a nationwide shutdown, we're forced to look into ourselves and be like, okay, like we're forced to sit with ourselves and sit with our thoughts, and we're not able to just go to work and think about just work and, not deal with that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think that's where a lot of people, the need for mental health, literally it spiked because a lot of people were sitting alone with themselves. They had time to think. Yep. And, sometimes your mind can be your worst enemy. And, everyone can feel that no matter if you have a mental diagnosis or not. Exactly. Your mind can be your worst enemy. And I think that for us in a shutdown, a nationwide shutdown, the only free thing that we were able to do is go to the store, and like me and my younger sister would volunteer, like, oh, I'll go grocery shopping, just things like that to get out of the house or go take a walk. But I think a lot of people, or, the social media aspect, a lot of therapists that I follow on social media said like, hey, here are some things that you can do during this pandemic, go on a walk, FaceTime a friend or something like that. Just to make you feel like you're not as alone as you may think that you are. And so I also think a lot of people don't really know the terms being alone versus lonely. And so us being alone means like if I were sitting in a room just by myself, that's me being alone. But if I'm feeling lonely, I could be surrounded by a group of people and still feel like I'm the only one there, that no one sees me. And so I think a lot of people before they felt lonely, but they knew that they were in a room of people. So they were like, okay, like, let me just push this back, not think about it, like just get through the day basically. But now since we're alone and if we're feeling lonely, then that's when people are like, okay, well, why do I feel this way? Like what's happening? What's going on? Like I haven't really felt this way before because we're not in our normal state of going out to work, going out on a Friday night, things like that. Yeah. So,
Laura, if you could give me a snapshot of a typical college student gathering, and I know that's probably been challenged because of social distancing and other things that we've had to practice, but college students getting together and going for hamburgers or getting together and just talking in the middle of campus, is the conversation, are y'all able to talk about normal college student things? I think about this all the time when I'm with my students. Are they still feeling like students, or are they feeling like people going through a crisis? When y'all get together and you interact, are college students talking about college student things, or are they talking about what's going on in society?
I think right now with online schooling, it's really hard for us to think about just being a normal student because we have, we're on Zoom and we have all of these other things on our laptop that could distract us. And, that's a normal thing for people to get distracted by. But I think when we do get the opportunity to hang out, like we're not talking about the pandemic or the social injustices going on. We're literally just being like, okay, so like I haven't seen you in weeks. Like what's new? Like what's up? Like things like that. And then once we get more comfortable, like get the small talk out of the way, we're like, okay, so like how are you dealing with this kind of stuff? Like, or what are your opinions on it? Because I know me and my friends, like we may have different opinions, but we do listen to each other, which is something that is really great, especially now, is that we actually do listen to each other. And, you know, if I don't like something that they said, I'm going to be like, okay, so why do you think that? Like things like that. But, you know, it takes a lot of effort to try and like figure out like, hey, when can we go out for hamburgers? Or, you know, when can we go shopping or something like that? Just because like we have so much other things going on. Like I know a lot of people are trying to get more involved in like online chat rooms and things like that, just because, you know, they're used to being outspoken, used to being doing that stuff on campus. And it's hard being here as an athlete, because I was here last semester as well, and, you know, there wasn't a lot of people here, so like walking to the cafeteria, it would be like a ghost town, and I'm like, this is so different. But, you know, the freshmen coming in, they're like, oh, this is so nice. Like, I get to park wherever I want to. And I'm like, you have no idea what it feels like trying to park on this campus. Like, you know, and so it's very different. Like me as a junior talking to our freshmen being like, this is how it used to be. I hope it gets back like this. But, you know, just things like that. It's hard to talk about the pandemic because everyone has different views about it. So we try not to talk about things like that, but if it does come up, we actually sit down and we're like, okay, like, let's talk about it. And me being a mental health advocate, I'm like, how are you feeling during that? Because, you know, I was feeling all sorts of way, but, you know, I had the resources that I had to be able to get through this. But like for you, like this is something new. Like the freshmen, they didn't have a senior year in high school, and I can only imagine how much that hurt them, because I remember my senior year and how fun prom was and graduation and things like that. But that's like, they see it from, you know, the older groups, but that was their normal, and this is still their normal. Online classes, finding parking on campus, you know, like this is their normal. So I'm worried that once things go back to, you know, like my kind of normal on campus, that they're going to be, you know, tossed and being like, what is happening? You know, because this is what they're used to coming into college. They're used to us not being able to gather in each other's rooms for a weekend and hang out with each other, you know? And so I think it's hard, but it's something that I think my team has done a really good job about being like, hey, like, you know, in-person classes next semester, you're not going to find parking on campus, so don't try. Like, don't try coming down the hill. You're going to have to walk unless we have practice at 6 a.m., you know, things like that. So, like, we're explaining to them, like, what our normal is on campus, which I think helps a lot. And then when we do go out for burgers or bowling or something like that, like, we try and do that stuff as a team so that no one feels left out and no one feels like, dang, like they didn't want me to come, you know, things like that. And as much as we see each other throughout the week with volleyball and weights, we're like, oh, you want to hang out? Like, let's still hang out, you know? But other sports, it's come to like a thing where it's like, well, I don't know where they've been and I don't want to get sick. And so that's like a huge thing going on right now with the pandemic. It's like, I don't know where people have been and I don't want to risk getting sick. So that's like the main thing that a lot of college athletes in particular have felt, because it's like, well, they've been around, you know, all of these teams. I haven't been around anyone because I'm not in season. Like, I'm nervous to hang out with them, you know.
And one interesting point you made, because we're talking about the pandemic, right, and adjusting and having to acclimate to a new normal. But Pilar made a good point. Like, once we're out of this, we're gonna have to adjust back. And I think there's a huge amount of anxiety for people. What's that gonna look like? And so I think when we're talking about mental health, that's something to pay attention to, that once we're out of this, that doesn't mean that the quote unquote mental health crisis is going to be over, because now we have to readjust. And some people have gotten very comfortable in this new normal and this new life that we've created because of the pandemic. And so I think that's something to be aware of, not only as a campus, but just as a city, as a state, as a society is, as we're adjusting back, we're going to see some mental health concerns pop up, and probably at a significant rate, because as Pilar said, we've readjusted to this. Like, this is our new normal. And getting back, it's like, oh, now I need to socialize. Now I need to be around people. Now I need to find parking. Now I need to be more patient. And so I think that's just something to kind of be mindful of. Like, when we get out of this, that doesn't mean that mental health gets better. Right. What it means is we need to just be more mindful of what's happening now. What are people struggling with? What are they adjusting to? And really be there to kind of give them that support as they acclimate back.
Well, in just a moment, we're going to go to break. And before we do, I want to thank y'all, because y'all have been able to help us conceptualize a lot about what is mental health and the state of it as we're understanding and living through it. And when we come back from break, we're going to talk about what do we do now, and how do we respond, and how do we react, and how do we approach this topic with compassion and care going forward. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
So far.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
During any health crisis, self-isolation is necessary to separate oneself from others to flatten the curve by stopping the spread of any infectious disease. During your self-isolation, you should try some activities to continue your active state of mind. They can include writing a letter to a friend, binge watching a new TV series, or FaceTiming with your friends or family members at any time. If you are feeling that you are developing a wide range of emotions that is affecting your mood, thinking, or behavior, connect with the crisis counselor during any crisis or during your self-isolation. Text the National Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741-741, or call the Bexar County Crisis Line at 210-223-7233. Create a plan, find support, and stay informed.
You are watching UIWtv, the word on campus.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alicia Caballero. Our broadcast today is coming live from Texas, but we know that our audience is across the state, the country, and a good number of you are tuning in from overseas. No matter where you are today, welcome to our Communication Arts TV studio, housed in the School of Media and Design at the University of the Incarnate Word. In just a few moments, we'll return to talk about it with Trey, with special guests, Dr. Kevin Mulligan, Director of UIW Counseling, and UIW student Pilar Gonzava. While they step aside for a quick breakfast taco break and a chance to refill their coffee, I'm going to give you some quick commercial updates. I'm going to focus on just a few things. Good luck with finals. Next week is finals week, and we wish you the best of luck. Be sure to get a good night's rest, eat well, and take frequent breaks. The UIW Library has extended hours for Nights in the Nest. Check out their website to view those hours, which begin today, Monday, April 26th, through Thursday, May 6th. If you haven't already taken care of registration for summer and/or fall 2021, be sure to contact your advisor today. Make sure you're prepared by reviewing the schedule available in Banner. Once you meet with your academic advisor, you will receive your alt pin and you will be ready to register. Join us for our upcoming ComArts events. In ComArts, we're responsibly gathering, even if virtually, to keep and strengthen our community. Next Monday, May 3rd, join us for a spectacular celebration with our students, faculty, and friends. ComArts is hosting 3 back-to-back events. Lambda Pi Eta Spring 2021 induction at 6 p.m., Meet the Masters and Honors Convocation at 6:30 p.m. We cannot wait to celebrate the newest inductees into Lambda Pi Eta, which is the official honor society for communication students. There are over 500 active chapters. Then, join us for Meet the Masters to view presentations by ComArts graduating graduate students. You'll be in awe of the hard work and research these students have done for their final capstone or thesis. Lastly, the department will recognize ComArts Student Award winners. Come support your fellow students and cheer them on. Third and finally, mark your calendars for Commencement. The spring class of 2021 will be honored with a modified in-person commencement ceremony on May 7th and 8th at UIW's Gale and Tom Benson Stadium. All in-person graduates and guests will be required to follow COVID-19 safety guidelines, including the use of masks and social distancing. Tickets to undergraduate, graduate, and PhD ceremonies will be strictly limited to 2 per student. All ceremonies will be live streamed. UIW will also host a baccalaureate mass on Thursday, May 6th at 6 p.m. All commencement ceremonies will be live streamed, and to view them, visit uiw.edu/commencement. If you would like to learn more about commencement, be sure to visit uiw.edu/spring 2021 commencement. Our event today is co-sponsored by the San Antonio chapter of the Fulbright Association. For their upcoming events, check out their Facebook or Instagram at FulbrightSA. Find out more about upcoming ComArts news and events by following us on social media at UIW ComArts on Facebook and UIW_com on Instagram and Twitter. That's all I've got for you. After this brief message, we will welcome back to the studio Dr. Trey and our special guest for today, Dr. Kevin Mulligan, Director of UIW Counseling, and UIW student Pilar Gonzava.
During any health crisis, self-isolation is necessary to separate oneself from others to flatten the curve by stopping the spread of any infectious disease. During your self-isolation, you should try some activities to continue your active state of mind. They can include writing a letter to a friend, binge watching a new TV series, or FaceTiming with your friends or family members at any time. If you are feeling that you are developing a wide range of emotions that is affecting your mood, thinking, or behavior, connect with the crisis counselor during any crisis or during your self-isolation. Text the National Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741-741 or call the Bexar County Crisis Line at 210-223-7233. Create a plan, find support, and stay informed.
About mental health and well-being. We've discussed a lot about what is mental health and what's the state of it today. Now we're going to talk about what can we do to be an enlightened and compassionate citizen. How can we care well for one another in this time? So let's talk about it. As a faculty member, as a fellow student on a college campus, as somebody who works on a college campus as the director of counseling, what are things that we can be doing to love one another well?
I mean, that's a good question. We get asked all the time, like, what can we do? And a lot of times I'm like, if you have the answer to that, let me know. But I think it definitely starts with just being, like you said, being compassionate, being able to care about someone enough to want to know what they're going through. I think the biggest area that we fall short when it comes to discussing mental health is we feel like very uncomfortable with it. But it's like, would you feel uncomfortable talking with someone about their diabetes or their cancer or, something that's a medical or physical health, a broken leg or a sprained ankle? We have to be able to get to a place where we're comfortable talking about it. And I think that starts with just making that effort. If you see someone, as we talked about earlier, that's sitting alone or crying or, you just notice in their nonverbals, they just look down or they look like something's wrong. It's okay to just say, hey, I noticed you're sitting by yourself. Is it all right if I join you? Are you doing okay? I think the biggest thing too is being open to people's experiences. I think one of the biggest things I've noticed working with individuals is a lot of people have a hard time recognizing why someone is struggling with what they're struggling with. And so instead of addressing it, they either ignore it or they invalidate it. So I think one of the biggest things we can do is when you know someone's struggling with something, do everything in your power to just be there for them, listen to them. Validate their experience, even if you don't feel the same way. Even if in the exact same situation you would feel completely different. They feel the way that they feel, and they're telling you that. They're vocalizing that to you. So don't invalidate that experience, because then what you're going to do is you're going to then make them feel like, oh, well, am I dumb for feeling this way? Like, should I feel this way? Like, Am I, was we, a word we don't want to use, but we hear it a lot in mental health. Am I crazy? Like, is there something going on with me? When in reality, it's like, no, you're experiencing an event. The way I like to describe mental health disturbances is you're responding normally to an abnormal situation. No one plans to deal with trauma. No one plans to deal with a lot of the things that we've dealt with. So who says there's a textbook on how to respond, right? So everyone's experiences are their own, and they need to be validated. They need to be normalized because that's their experience. So I think just having that conversation and being open to what they're going to share with us, being open to different opinions and different perspectives, I think will take us a long way in being able to show that support for each other and for the students. And, another area, if we're focusing campus-wide, I think peer support is huge. Because as Pilar and I were talking, with students, they may come to me or go to a professor, but they still see us as a person of authority. And so it's a lot more difficult for them to feel like they can open up or feel like we'll understand, a coach or someone of that nature. So I think the more that we can get peer advocacy as a movement moving forward, I think we'll see a significant increase in everyone's mental well-being. And not just at UIW, but, everywhere. One thing that we've been pushing with our program is we worked with the athletics department. And we've worked with them to create a peer mentor program. And what that is it's student run. And the students volunteer, and those who volunteer become a mentor or a peer mental health mentor for their teammates. And we've noticed a significant improvement in students' willingness to talk about it, willingness to reach out, because they're looking at their peer and they see themselves. And they're like, well, if Pilar's going through this, then I can too. Like she's shown me I can have the strength to do it. She's like me. And so I think the more we can educate our students and advocate for that peer-to-peer interaction is when we'll start to see a significant increase in the mental well-being of our students.
Right, and along with, peer mentoring, the club that I run on campus is peer-led, college student-led. We have a faculty advisor, yes, but we plan all of the things that we want to do ourselves. And, we make flyers for people to come and watch or come and speak at our seminars. And so I think when people realize, like, if they're attending that seminar, I remember one of the seminars that I was speaking at, I had someone text me afterwards and be like, hey, like, can we, I really liked what you talked about, can me and you talk about it some more one-on-one? And the biggest thing that I love when people say to me is, like, I'm so glad I'm not alone in the way that I'm feeling. Because a lot of people think that I am alone, like no one else feels this way. But when you have people like me and others across campus who want to speak up and want to help others and be like, you know what, like, you're not alone in the way that you're feeling. Like, it's not normal to feel this way, but nothing is normal. Like there's no set definition of normal. And I think that's what a lot of people, don't understand is like, I feel like I have to be normal every single day. Well, my normal is different from his normal. That's different from your normal, and I think that with the peer-led and peer advocacy, like, that helps a lot of people because we don't always want to listen to a doctor or anything like that because sometimes we just want our friends to be like, you know what, like, yeah, like, let's do that, because we understand each other and, there's, no offense, but there's a big age gap, between us. And
she's aging us.
Yeah. But, like, I would rather talk to my best friend about something that I'm feeling than being like, I'm going to go talk to this complete stranger that I have no idea. They don't know me. I don't know them. Yeah. Like, I'm just going to sit down and talk to my best friend instead. And so I think that's a big thing is, especially on campus, since I'm a junior, I've been here since my freshman year, I've seen a huge growth in peer advocacy on campus. And I think that's the biggest thing because once people realize, like, oh, I sought treatment for this, I'm going to counseling, they're like, oh, well, what do y'all do in counseling? Or I tell them some techniques that I've done, they're like, huh, like, I've never tried that before. Yeah. Or they research the counseling center, things like that. So I think peer advocacy is definitely one of the biggest things moving forward for my generation and generations to come to start, just talking about it. You don't have to wait until someone is laying in bed crying to want to talk about something. And most of us, we always like to be right. I know I do, so like we would love for someone to be like, you know what, like, it's okay to feel this way. You have the right to feel this way. No one can tell you that no one can tell you any differently, because you have the right to feel what you're feeling, and no one can come up to you and be like, you should not feel that way, because that, you know, that doesn't make us feel any better. Yeah. And so a lot of our friends, like, granted, like, tough love, like, sometimes, you know, if someone's overreacting, you can be like, okay, well, have you tried thinking about it this way? Yeah. You know? And so I think, especially as a college student, peer advocacy is like the number one thing, because I used to be so scared to talk to anyone about anything. And as soon as I, you know, started going to counseling here, I was like, dang, like, you know, I feel good. Like, you know, I want other people to feel the way that I feel right now, because this is something that I think everyone, even if you're not going through a major crisis, like, we can still get almost anything out of counseling. You know, you don't have to just go if you're suffering from something. You can go and be like, I need relationship advice, you know. And I think that's a huge stigma surrounding counseling too, is that you have to be in a crisis to be able to go. Yeah. And for me, it's like, you know what, like, I might be going through a crisis, but I also have techniques that they have taught me to, you know, calm myself down to where, you know, I can rationalize things and think about things, you know, and help others if they're in that way. Like, I remember one of my friends was having an anxiety attack, and I'm sure you're familiar with the grounding technique. You know, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, things like that. So you're focusing on something so that you're not like, oh, I can't breathe. And I'm like, you're breathing, but it's okay. You know, it's okay, things like that. So I think peer advocacy is something that is growing, but should be growing more everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's on college campuses, at work. I think it should be growing everywhere. And that's something that social media can help with. Like I said before, there's a lot of good platforms on social media that people can seek when they're feeling down or they feel like crying about something. You know, there's a lot of good things that you can see on social media. And it sucks that you have to kind of dig for it, you know, because of all of everything going on. Everyone has something going on, but you really have to, it's like finding a counselor. Like, you have to find something that suits you. Yeah. And if you see something on Instagram that doesn't suit you, you know, are you going to be strong enough to unfollow it or block it, things like that? Yeah. Which I've definitely seen a lot more. I can't think of how many people and stuff that I've unfollowed on Instagram, because I'm like, you know, like, they are portraying this, you know, idea that, you know, I'm not really familiar with, or I don't really, let's say, like. And so I find someone who is portraying what I like, and, you know, we gravitate to things that we like. And so I think a lot with social media, like, there are bad things, but there are also very good things on social media. And you just have to be able to be strong enough to be like, okay, I'm going to take time and research what I want to look up and everything like that.
So I have a thought. If you come across a student or a friend or somebody on campus or somebody in the community that you suspect would really benefit from talking to a professional and visiting with a counselor or someone, what's the most loving way to encourage them to do so?
I think obviously first just listening to what they're going through, and then I think just making recommendations. Sometimes, you know, sharing what's worked for you, like Pilar has stated, can be very helpful. Because a lot of times, you know, there's a stigma attached with counselors. You know, some people have had bad experiences and some have had great experiences. And so I think it's just being open to knowing that the opportunity to get that help is there. And so I think if you approach someone, just letting them know that you're there to support them, you know, that you want to be there to listen to them, but also letting them know, like, hey, there's people out there who can help you. You know, I've experienced this. This has helped me. You know, this is how they help me. Maybe giving some examples like that. Sometimes just asking the right questions. I think one of the biggest things that when it comes to mental health and talking about it, people are afraid to ask certain questions. Yes. You know, there's this idea that if you ask someone, do you want to kill yourself, that's going to make them want to do it. And the reality is that is completely false. It doesn't happen. What it does is it allows them to know that someone cares. Someone cares enough to ask me that question. And now you're going to get an answer to know if they need to get that help or not. So I think it's being open to asking those questions. Like, And it's sometimes just asking them, what do you need? You know, what have you done? What help can I give you? And I think asking those questions, because they may have tried a bunch of different things and that haven't worked. So then that's your opportunity to say, oh, well, have you tried this? Or maybe you can try the counseling center now. There's new staff there. You know, maybe there's just being open to what they have to say and being willing to ask what we would consider the difficult questions. Because no question you ask someone is going to make them do something.
Right.
You know, everyone still has that choice. But what it's going to do is it's going to let them know that you are aware and you care. And that's what matters.
Excellent. Before we sign off, I want to give each of you a chance to share a final thought or word until next time.
Okay. You want to go first, Paula?
Yes. So my final thought and word is, you know, be supportive of one another. That's the biggest thing. And also, like, there are resources on your college campus, you know, in your county, you know, that state. Here's a suicide hotline number you can call, or here's an email you can email someone. And also just being open about having these different conversations, because a lot of us are scared to have it. Like, I know sometimes I'm scared to ask those hard questions, but like sometimes those hard questions are the questions that need to be asked, and you know, that probably need to be answered as well. You know, and join NAMI on campus. So
Excellent. Dr. Morgan?
Thank you, Paula. I think the biggest thing to end with is just recognize that it's okay to feel that way. If you're struggling with anxiety or depression or things that are making you uncomfortable, it's okay. You know, I think that idea of acceptance is so important to getting help, because what happens is people tend to push them aside. They push them away. They don't want to deal with them. But what that ends up doing is they don't go away. They build up and they build up and they build up. You know, and I like to compare it to like a volcano. You know, a volcano, it can be an active volcano, but it hasn't erupted in thousands of years. Because underneath the surface, there's a lot of movement, a lot of pressure being built up. Eventually, when that pressure builds up, we get an eruption. And then everything around it is destroyed. That's how it is with mental health. We hold it in, we hold it in, we hold it in. It's going to eventually build up to the point where we can't, and we're going to erupt. And anyone that's unfortunate enough to be around us at that moment is going to feel the wrath of that emotional eruption. So I think it's important to accept that what we're feeling is okay. You know, anger is an okay emotion. It's a healthy emotion. It's how we respond and how we react that causes the issues that we come up with. So I think just be accepting of yourself, be accepting of others. You know, be mindful of those around you and recognize that even if someone looks like they're doing okay, it doesn't hurt to say, how are you doing? You know, how can I help? You know, those type of questions. And know, you know, that there's resources out there. There are people who want to help, whether it's your peers, whether it's a professional, whether it's a faculty or staff, people want to help. So do not be afraid to ask.
right.
You know, ask us. We're here. Counseling services, we're on the 4th floor in the AD building. We are ready to help you. Go to our website. All the paperwork to fill out is there. All you got to do is make that first step, and we'll help you get there.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Milligan.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Pilar.
Yes.
So grateful for your time. I believe we can all agree that our time here today does not put a close to a conversation. Instead, it reminds us that we must continue talking together, working together to create safe spaces. Spaces where promoting mental health is the norm and where we champion the well-being of all persons. To our Fulbrighters and friends of Fulbright, thank you for urging us to think and talk about important issues. Lastly, to our fabulous UIWtv crew and Comm Arts department at UIW, thank you for making this production happen. That's all for this edition of Talk About It with Trey. We hope you will join us next time.